Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the brave, the bold, the folks that are entering the session today, because this is one that a lot of folks are not comfortable with, even face-to-face versus talking a virtual. But I have to tell you, by the end of the session, I think you'll not only feel comfortable, but you might feel motivated to actually offer some virtual book clubs. And I entitle this one because I've done it with both face-to-face and virtually for the students as well as the parents. So hopefully you gain some new kind of ideas from this. Our norms for our work today are the same as they've been since mid-March. It is a nice small group, and we will be doing a lot of discussion. Obviously, we're going to take you through the book club format, but use chat if in the interim. If we're not discussing, feel free to use the chat to ask questions during the first portion of the session. Mike and Renee are here to moderate and to interrupt me and ask any questions in the midst of the session if something occurs to you. We, of course, record this, and it will be posted probably earlier today, as well as the slides, because there are some resources on here as well. If you haven't done so, I think I know everybody here, but please, for the purposes of attendance for the Act 48, because this week is the last Act 48, like the free trainings we will be doing, please use the rename feature. Go up to by your name, click rename, and go ahead and list your school's initials. And so we're going to begin. A very singular, but I have to tell you folks, like a very daunting one learning target for today in an hour or less than an hour. We will talk about equitable online discussion techniques in order to develop, how do we develop the deeper discussions? And the irony is that a lot of folks that I work with, teachers that I've trained, have issues with this in their classroom. So take it, and it's very fascinating to me. Some students in particular like the online format, and it's more effective for a deeper discussion rather than the face-to-face. So a lot of the principles and the tenets we're going to talk about and explore in the next hour definitely would apply to both the virtual as well as the online. But there are folks that are very uncomfortable with the online when we have so much silence. So we'll look at some techniques and things that you do, hopefully, to kind of combat that. This is, please note, and if anyone has questions about grade level appropriateness for you or your content area, this is K through 12. This is all content areas. I also facilitate these with adult learners, and they, I have to tell you, are quite successful. So hopefully you learn a little bit. If we're going to look at pictures or we're going to look at a piece of fiction, this works with nonfiction, it works with memoir, it works with articles. As you see, we'll look at a lot of different types of text. So to get us started, very quick into it here, and it's a nice small group today so everyone can respond, but which portrait best represents your comfort level in facilitating discussions, whether they're virtual or face-to-face? Because I do know that this is uncharted territory for a lot of us. So I have 3 portraits here. Please unmute and go ahead and share. We have the Diane version on the left of my portrait. Then we have, you might know him in the center. I think this is one of Mike's favorites. And then we have the Mona Lisa. So go ahead and make sure when we want to foster discussion, it's not about so much what they're identifying, because it's free choice, which is very important for facilitating discussion. But even more importantly, these are kind of like maturation levels of our comfort level. So who would like to share? Where are you at in terms of facilitating discussions with students? Unmute and go. Oh, so Sean raised his hand. Mike, is there something up with the volume today?
No, I'm good. I just didn't want to interrupt anyone.
Sean, which are you?
I would say in person, I'm, depending upon the topic, probably somewhere between Homer and like a really grainy Mona Lisa.
Okay.
Not quite as in detail, but online, I'm probably closer to the stick figure.
Very, very nice, Sean. And I know, like you personally, like you do engage your kids in a lot of dialogue. And I think the thing that we have to give up is the notion of everybody has a job, particularly for online. Everyone is an equal. So everyone has every job, so to speak. In face-to-face, a lot of folks will start out with like a role sheet or a different job for each person. If you want to get the most out of the facilitation online, it does become necessary to engage all, even when they're uncomfortable. So thank you, Sean. Who else? Where are you? And tell us why. And you notice for some, not for me, but you notice that there's a definite lag when you're doing virtual. First thing I could do is, and I don't want to torture anybody, but with your kids particularly, you would say, I need to see you. So everybody, let's see the audio. The next would say to a group of learners online, your students, I would definitely say, everybody on mic. So let's try that. Everyone on mic, because we're small enough. I think we're at like 15 or something. Yeah. So everyone on mic. And I'll try a little random reporter then. Where are you at in the scheme of things, Florence? Where are you at with online or face-to-face facilitation?
Hi, Diane. Sorry, I got called out to another Zoom meeting and back, so I kind of lost the beginning of this. But basically, I would think I'm pretty much the stick figure. I really miss the actual feedback that you get from the visual cues from people. And for me, that's hard. I feel like I'm just talking into an abyss. So, you know, and I've done a lot of virtual trainings and stuff, and it just, you don't get the same kind of feeling that you do from a classroom.
Thank you, Florence. And I got to, and Florence is a technology wizard, I have to tell you folks, out of state college. So you're absolutely right. So with students, particularly with students, you'd, if at all possible, especially when you're doing the online or virtual, you want to be able to see those folks. Because you're absolutely right, Florence. And another thing a lot of folks are experiencing with Zoom or online is the interruptedness. Like there's a little bit of a lag. So Jen starts to speak and Sean's speaking, oh, okay, no, never mind, you go first. So I will tell you that you can probably figure out, these seem very basic, but number one is assess where your kids are at, or the adults, if you're developing a parent-child book club that we'll talk about.
And the other point I wanted to make, Diane, was also the fact of scale. You know, I've had to have trainings with many, many people, and that scale is really difficult to deal with. So it's the, you know, breaking things down as small groups as possible, I would think, can help foster that communication that we miss in this environment.
Thank you, Florence. And folks, that is a great point. If you are working with a large group, like the week one of the pandemic, our groups were massive, like hundreds of people. You have to know in that space, and hopefully you don't have 100 students logging on and working with you at one point, at one time. But the truth of the matter is it's going to be more informational. It's not going to be as interactive, the larger the group. The rule of thumb for discussion groups, folks, according to one of the kind of researchers that's a pivotal, really monumental in starting the whole notion of students taking over discussions, Harvey Daniel says approximately 5 to 7 is a good group size. I would even say with the younger children, don't exceed 4. So if you have younger kids, that is why, by the way, Zoom is very beneficial with the use of the breakout rooms. So a lot of us that don't like, you know, in your content area, kind of like are thinking, I don't have my kids discuss. And that's okay. You might be more of a didactic where you are doing the speaking and then the kids are responding. But what we do know about discussion is, I can tell you, this is out of John Hattie's work on visible learning. The benefit of discussion versus teacher talk, the student talk, is instrumental in a deeper learning. So the discussion does help the students process. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. This is John Hattie's research. It helps them process new knowledge, and the skills into a deeper learning. We know that we need, like Florence is saying, it's very difficult when you're online. It's difficult in face-to-face when children are just not accustomed to sharing. So anything you can do to break that ice is important. So Mike and Renee and I were just talking yesterday. Sorry, folks. I pop up things on the screen. And when we were talking about, ironically, about being in a space, and in that space, how do you foster collaboration? Because there are things, so in the online format, it becomes much more imperative to do it, because it could be just a sit and get, or a sitting, as they say. So the actual process we're going to take a look at is fairly simple, folks. The participants, probably the crux of everything you do, particularly with online discussion, requires that we are teaching participants how to question and how to respond. And the responding part is very interesting, because those of us that don't have the classroom wait time, you'll find yourself going ahead and answering. And we want to keep away from that. We want to steer clear of that. The second move is having the participants describe what they expect to see in a high quality discussion. So we will do a little bit of that debriefing here, kind of like discussing, so what would be acceptable, what is unacceptable. A lot of teachers really kind of veer away from format online because it's unpredictable. And frankly, the unpredictability is something that comes. Sorry, I had my dog, so I put my earbuds in here. And move 3 is asking the participants to reflect, self-monitor, and set goals. All very, very easy, and we're kind of like, oh, okay, that's a simple process. But what does it look like for us to actually engage learners? And keeping in mind, folks, all these notes are available along with the archive video. We have divergent questions, and I loved this synopsis from Diane Cunningham out of ASCD. We have convergent questions. The divergent questions are really where we want to land. We want to take a look at the types of, and I created these because I liked the way that they are broaching or approaching different content areas. Teddy is fired up, Mike. I don't know what he's doing there. Looking for open-ended responses, allowing a number of different or alternative responses, is what you want to foster for collaboration and discussion. So I'm not saying, for those of us that use a lot of convergent questions, I'm not saying that's a no-no, but knowing your target, and the target is discussion among your kids in your classroom, whether it be virtual or face-to-face, it's really important to note that with the divergent, you're going to get more discussion. To that end, some of the things we're going to take a look at, the different pieces of text we're going to examine, folks. So I don't pick safe text. Now, I know that you're in the classroom, so I know that you're not going to, like in high school, I taught high school, I'm not going to use, what was that horrible book, 50 Shades of Grey. I'm not, it's like literarily, it's not good. Women loved it. It's not good writing. As a writer, I can say that. But looking at things that are controversial or offer polarizing views is a good avenue in to questioning, okay? So we are going to play with this a bit. So the divergent, some of my elementary friends might call these thick questions, or they're more open-ended in nature. The convergent questions are going to be the questions that you're typically looking for a singular response, okay? So we're gonna start with, I like to look at different media here. So we're gonna start with the painting. I think this is one that a lot of folks are probably quite familiar with. It is called The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali. If I wanted to start with learners that really aren't used to conversing with the dialogue, I would maybe even, and you folks have seen this, I would leave the title off and even ask them, what would you entitle this picture or this painting and why? But images, please don't rule those out if you're working with your students and this is new to you. Like in social studies, a political cartoon. It might be any type of visual, but what you're doing is looking to generate the discussion. So I want you, and this is going to be, there's a safety net here, because this is pretty early on, and some of us are English a little more comfortable, and some of us aren't. I'm going to go ahead and actually have you try it independently, but then we'll share out. I want you to try to create a divergent question for this particular painting entitled The Persistence of Memory. Like it could be something you'd ask your classmates, or in other words, we're classmates here, but what kind of question pops into your mind? And then we'll take a look at, is this divergent or is this convergent? Try to aim for that we are able to digress or diverge from it. So there is the big, little pixely. But this is one I'd want everyone to unmute, please. And what types of questions, because this is a good warm-up activity, as well as the first 3 pictures, the portraits I had. You'll see a theme here in a minute. What types of questions would you ask? Let's unmute our mics, everybody. Excellent. Jackie, what do you think? Oops, let me move.
Hi. How are you?
Pretty good.
So I love this painting. I would probably ask something about the clock. So maybe something to the effect of, what do they think, what do you think the clocks symbolize in this painting? Why do you think the clocks may be shaped the way that they are, flattened or melting or whatever? But just to have the kids talk about the clocks, their meaning, how they connect to the piece as a whole, and what the artist's intent was in painting them that way.
Very, very nice, Jackie. Thank you. And those are all the series of divergent questions. When we ask a question for dialogue, for those of us that don't do this regularly, and you're asking a question that has, you know what you want the answer to be, that's not good for discussion. It might be good in the classroom, so we need to blend our questioning, but knowing that when we want to facilitate dialogue, that doesn't happen. How about Andy? Andy, do you have a question about?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the clocks too, but maybe we can even relate it to if the students know the artist and can relate it to other pieces of work that they have seen from him or anything like that.
Beautiful. So, Andy tapped into something, absolutely. You could take multiple pieces of text, and then one might be visual, one might be a brief reading about Salvador Dali. He was quite a character. It might be you juxtapose or take a look at 2 pieces of artwork together. Picasso is one that had a lot of different periods, so that the style is very different. I think when you see a Dali, you know that it is. I think when you see a Van Gogh, I think it's very like folks know it. So that's awesome. Andy, who else? Question you'd ask, or you'd ask for a discussion. Because what you're doing is, this next question, we're going to go ahead and open it to a discussion.
Maybe even the background. Why is it so desolate? Why did he choose to put in what he did?
Great question, Jen. Very divergent. Let's talk about it. I'm not saying anything. Folks, go ahead. Why do you think the background is like it is?
I think it's so you focus on what he put in the painting more than what's going on behind it.
Excellent. Very nice. Who else?
I'm just curious what that flat surface is at the top left of the painting. It's so different from everything else that's in this particular painting.
That's awesome, Nikki. That's very, very observant. Who wants to weigh in on that? Thoughts, ideas?
I look at it as it's almost a juxtaposition of natural versus man-made. So we have the man-made clocks, and then you have the cliffs there, and then that tree, but the tree is growing not out of the ground. It's growing out of like a machined slab, which is also kind of what's in the background. So I'm almost wondering if it's the intrusion of industrial on nature.
Did you Google that, Mike?
I did not, Diane. I'm just cultured.
Very, very nice. So,
despite being from Altoona, I did go to some museums.
Oh, there you go. Anyone else?
I was gonna say they look like doors, like the one that Nikki said looked like a door.
Yes.
And a door through the window of time is kind of where I was thinking with that.
Excellent. How about one more person? One more.
I've got to go my history connection. So knowing he's painting in the early 1900s,
Yes.
I know the world is dealing with all kinds of crazy radical changes in a lot of ways. They're dealing with a world war, form of World War One. They're dealing with all kinds of revolutionary ideas like Freud with the subconscious in the late early 1900s, and all kinds of other stuff. So I think it's taking a look at sort of the craziness of the modern, in quotes, at that time world.
That's amazing, Sean. I have to tell you folks, what you just did, and it was slightly, and you be honest, did you feel slightly uncomfortable, especially when I said unmute the mics? Because that's kind of our safety. And when I really, really want to detach from something, and I'm not saying I do in many of my trainings, not when I'm facilitating, but if I'm in something and it's a lot of dialogue, a lot of lecture, I'm going to see, you're going to see Hubona, I'm going to be muted. So getting over that hurdle with folks, particularly students, are a little more vocal. But if you were trying to run and you're interested in running, we'll talk about like a parent-child or a parent club where you meet up with your parents and discuss some type of piece of text. It's really important. So what did we do? What did that feel like? It was slightly uncomfortable. You have to just go with it. You have to roll with it, baby, okay? The other thing is, it has to be something. If I had a very simplified or very traditional piece of text there, it's not going to garner as much conversation. So Dolly is one I picked. I'm glad Jackie loves him. I love his work too, but I picked it because it is very surrealistic in nature. So it's open to interpretation. If I were Sean and I'm using this with my kids, I would then pull up a piece of text because he's right on the mark. I would pull up a piece of text about the analysis of this painting so that you can pair the visual along with a piece of text. Very, very nice. So are you feeling warmed up, folks? I think so. You did a great job with that. Not everyone's participating yet. Please don't, as a facilitator, don't panic when you're like, oh, I had 20 kids in the room and 5 are really dominating. It takes time to foster this. But if you were to do this on a regular, I'm saying even in my classroom, we did it face-to-face on a once-a-week basis, the kids get to the point where they can take over the discussion completely.
Diane, question from the chat.
Yes.
Is there a resource of artwork that you like to use for this? Is there a kind of a one-stop shop, or is it stuff you're picking from what you know?
I pick from, I do have, obviously with the son that is an artist, I have an extensive love of art, but I can gladly, I'll go ahead before, Mike, before we, even if you posted the slide, there are different, in other words, if you're going to look at MoMA or you're going to look at National Gallery of Art, if you want like a portrait, there are places that you can go. So I'll absolutely attach some of those. What I do, Jen, is especially like for your grade level, they can really analyze and discuss the crazier, the better. But if it's too obtuse, and that's why a lot of folks don't like poetry, the poets that are very, very kind of like, they're not so in your face, it's not a narrative style. But yes, so I'll add some of those for you because there are, for my social studies folks, the New York Times has what's going on in this picture. That would be a great way to start a literary online discussion. So I know we're talking about book talks, but folks, I want to be very clear here. You don't begin with a book. You begin with some type of text that the learners can negotiate a lot simpler, okay?
Diane, is this very much like we've done explicit, implicit? Is
yes,
that?
ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So imagine this, Jen, forever. This is the way I taught. So TDA for a teacher such as myself was like, what's the big deal? But a lot of us that, you know, weren't introduced to teaching in that manner or capacity, that's why they say kids can't do this. Absolutely. They can discuss quotes. They can discuss cartoons. They can discuss a picture, a painting, a song. Like Jackie, I know, is one of my coaches. She's used the lyrics from Frozen and other songs. That they are all part of literary discussion, okay? So don't think of it as I'm going to start with a book and the kids are flailing with this. So there are the steps for the quality discussion. Where we're at right now, we kind of like bypassed already the preparation. But for you as a teacher, it's important to note, what is it? If they're going to have to read, especially in a virtual world, I like that they're going to read right there in the midst of it. But if it's some of the training, we're going to try that. But if it's something where you want them to read ahead of time, we'll talk about your text choice. It has to be something that they can manage independently at their grade level. The collaboration is where we're lingering right now. And then I have to tell you, you guys leapt right into the quality of the discussion, that you were really, really digging deeper and responding in a very, very much more, a deeper way. The one thing for quality of discussion, folks, for students, because I coach debate, mock trial, student congress for 24 years, and is the last component under quality of discussion, that you teach kids to agree and disagree respectfully. Because if Sean has someone, like Sean made that statement, and that was a very, very intuitive, very thoughtful statement. Someone in the group can't say, well, I don't agree, or, well, that was stupid. In other words, if they're going to disagree, there has to be some reasoning, some rationale for doing so. So it really is, you guys already showed that you're like a step above by what you just did with that painting. As I discussed previously, you want to start with smaller pieces of text. We build to a book, unless it is a children's group, and you're able to do an entire book. Like I love the Knuffle Bunny series. If I'm working with kindergartners or first graders, honestly, I'd use it with fifth graders and use that like the picture book, but they're just beautifully done, and use that as your piece of text. For my secondary folks, you should have seen the amount of information I found when I Googled microfiction. They're 1,000 words or less story. And I really, for high school or middle school, I recommend the microfiction or poetry, because the microfiction is something in that sitting with you. If you have 40 minutes with the kids, you could actually devote 10 minutes and have them. I don't think it takes that long. Well, the piece we're going to look at today, I was telling Renee, I read it in approximately 3 minutes. So I'll give the group probably 6 or 7 minutes just to be safe, so that we can read and then discuss in that format. So starting with less text is always better. So here's someone that wants to, and I knew we have, especially with social studies folks, they are all about quotes. And so I'm using my Shakespearean, Mike would pick up on it here. So chew upon this, as Shakespeare would say. And I have a quote here. So imagine those teachers that say on a test, they're assessing, here are a bunch of quotes, and now over here, match and tell me who said it. What is the level of rigor or the depth of discussion? Actually, there's no discussion, okay, typically with that. It's a recognition and recall. So using quotations that are meaty quotations is another very good access into preparing folks for book groups and the discussion that ensues. So this is, I think you've probably seen or heard this one before, but I loved it. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. So it would obviously be like, wow, we're reading 12th Night, and I would pull this, and this could be for one of my book talk groups or book discussion groups, that might be their quote, and they might spend 15 minutes, like a spurt, not 30 minutes, discussing this. So let's unmute again. Let's see if we can get some new folks involved. And what are you thinking? Like, what stands out for you here? Or what do you, even if you don't know 12th Night, that's okay. But what are you thinking about this particular quotation? And I won't mute folks, but it would be awesome if we could hear from some folks that hadn't participated yet. There aren't that many of you that haven't spoken yet. Really focusing on the some have greatness thrust upon them. But what are your thoughts, reactions to this? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Those are great book club questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this?
Diane, I'll talk about it.
Okay.
I was thinking about that part, the some have greatness thrust upon them. I was thinking about that as in terms of a leadership role, where maybe there's some kind of, like right now we have
this pandemic going on, there's some kind of disaster, and people are not really thinking that they obviously don't know that that's coming, but then are forced to sort of rise up and do something about it. So that greatness thrust upon them, I guess maybe it depends on how they respond to it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Stacy. And that's the irony is, well, you know me so well. That's why I selected this quote. I thought this speaks to teachers. These are the folks that I work with. Stacy, bounce to someone else. We're going to do a little pause, bounce, bounce now.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go with, how about Mary?
Sure. I read this and I can think of like a person for everything. So some are born great. I'd say Tiger Woods probably born basically with a golf club in his hand. Some achieve greatness, some people who work really hard for that. And then I like the some have greatness thrust upon them, because if we think back in history of leaders and people who had to take the reins, definitely came out of that shining, while some other people don't. And I like that. So yeah, I think that'd be very good to talk about.
Awesome, Mary. And as you can see, it doesn't have to be tons and tons of words in order to have a lot of depth to it. So this is where myself, when I acted as an instructional coach in my district, this was fun for me. Like Jen saying about pictures, helping folks locate things, because you might have an idea, but you're like, I don't know what to use. Mary, how about one more bounce? Bounce to one more person, please. It's awkward, isn't it? Especially when you don't know the people.
It is, and I'm trying to like find the name. How about, I'm gonna pick on Andy. Sorry, Andy.
Good.
Thanks, Mary. I can relate it to what I teach. I teach child development. So it's a very interesting class where we have young learners and high school students. So often my high school students come into this environment having really no experience working with young kids at all. So the greatness is often thrusted upon them, or they don't do so well. So,
That's awesome.
So I completely agree with this quote, especially in my situation there. So
very, very nice. Thank you, Andy. You guys are getting better. But Mary, can you sense the hesitancy? Now your kids would typically know each other, but you folks are doing this, and some of you, Andy, do Andy and Mary work together?
yes, we do.
Yeah, we're at the high school.
Yeah, there you go. So it's definitely when you know someone, that's your comfort zone. So that other little technique we threw in there, folks, you can do the random reporter, where that's more directed by me, where I'm calling upon people and Stacy, Mike, respond. But I really love, and your kids they'll respond to it, that pause, pounce, bounce, where I started by calling upon someone spoke, and then I said, go ahead and bounce to someone else. So that's a classroom technique that honestly fosters a lot of collaboration online. You guys are doing awesome. I know it's uncomfortable, but you're really hanging very, very nicely. So I have a piece of text, and this will really be the challenge here. I'll go ahead, actually, Mike, so that I don't have to, no, I'll go ahead and do it. I was gonna say, I created the bit.ly to try to shorten this, but this is a piece of text I'm thinking a lot of particularly English people will know. Some of you might read this piece of text and say, well, that was stupid. That's okay. And some of you are going to read it and say, this could be my life. Welcome to my life. It is entitled, and I'll go back to this in a second, The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. So I think just the visual, if I were working with kids, it is a nice, short, brief piece of text, but I would start with this visual, the actual, the illustration for the story itself. And that, frankly, would garner probably a 10-minute discussion with my students right off the bat. Because, I mean, look at this female's posturing, what's going on there. Here's how we're going to do this. We are going to be placing you in smaller groups so that each group will go ahead. We'll be reading the text independently. And I said for Mike, I love the music, but we won't play music while you're reading today. I'm going to anticipate probably about 6 minutes for the reading of this. And I'd like you then, when we put you into breakout rooms, you're going to discuss, but really develop one divergent question.
because often the questions that we evoke, that we use with our learners in any content area, are going to determine what we get. So even my math teachers, when you give a problem, I don't think we have any math in here, do we? If you give a problem and you say, solve this, that is not really fostering Divergent, although we could. If you say, talk about 3 different ways I can solve this, that's Divergent. If you are studying one format or one formula and you tell the kids, okay, here's the formula, now solve this, that is very convergent in nature. But even in a math classroom, what steps would you take to go ahead and solve this? That is a Divergent question versus solve this. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to go ahead, stop sharing for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and I'll give you the link, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm not even good enough at copying that much text in a row. And what we're going to do is you're going to locate, and you could Google it on your own and go ahead and do that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and throw the link in the chat, and hopefully, Mike, it's not blocked today. It was the one day, but I think we remedied that situation.
It came up for me. I typed it in.
Okay, it came up for you. Excellent. So hold on. So I'm going back to my Zoom, and I will go ahead and throw this in the chat. And here's how we'll do this, because you're kind of like, so how do I do this with kids? What I'd like you to do is, once you've read this, The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin, how about you go to your participant and you just click on yes. So that way I'll know if we don't need 6 minutes, we won't take the entire 6 minutes, okay? So go ahead and read, folks. If there's anyone having an issue, let me know. It's 11:07, so hopefully by 11:13. When you finish reading, you don't have to interpret it deeply at this point, because that's what a good book talk or good book group discussion will do. Jen listens to Renee and she picks up new ideas and so on. So I'm going to be quiet now so that you may read, okay? So folks, I see 4 of you are indicating that you've finished. That would be our 6-minute mark. If you are not done, I can add on another minute or so. Oh, hold on, now we're getting more folks. Definitely a quirky piece of literature. Has anyone ever taught this one before? You usually see it more at the secondary, although I've seen it in middle school pieces of text, but very, very nice. So the story of an hour it's known to be a pretty complex piece of text. So what we're going to do now is, this is, especially if you're doing virtually or online, I would not ask students in particular to create questions independently. It's just too much. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to very quickly throw you into a room, and I can find it. And as we get into breakout rooms, well, we can't get into breakout rooms. And I just told Mike, no, it's okay to go ahead and leave.
You can now. You're the host now. You should be able to do it.
Thank you, Mike. It wasn't there a second ago. Thanks. So what I'd like to do is, let's just put, and we're not going to linger too long, but let's say I'm going smaller so that it'll be more productive. When you get with your group, I want you each to create a question that you'd have, a divergent question as a result, that you think would be good for a lit circle or a book talk discussion, okay? And I'm only going to give you probably about 3 minutes to do that. So when you get together, 3 to 4 minutes, okay? So as you see your invite to your room, go ahead and join the room. And they're groups of 3.
Hello.
Hi.
So I actually got a phone call and didn't get to read it. I just got back to the room. So I'm not going to be able to do much good here as far as helping with a question.
That's okay. It was an interesting story. I've never heard of it before.
Yeah, I've read it before, but I'd have to skim over it again to remember all of it. But
let's see. I mean, I guess a question could be how was her reaction? How did you feel about her reaction? Like, was it what you expected? What were you thinking? I don't know.
I'm skimming over it now to try to see if it jogs my memory here.
I feel like that's too pointed. I mean, maybe even just asking them, like, so what happened? Like, what happened in this story? And what did you think about it? Because my kids are lower level readers anyway. They might need some great walking through this to understand it.
I mean, it's definitely like Diane mentioned, it's complex, but it's also very deep.
Yeah.
So if you do have a lower level reader, they may not get what she's actually going. They may not even say, figure out what she's talking about here.
Yeah. That would be my concern for my kids for sure.
Yeah. I would think even the last part of the last sentence, and I know she's going to bring us back into the room here. We only have 20 seconds, but there might be something there that, the joy that kills.
That kills. There we go.
Heart disease, the joy that kills. because was it the physical heart or was it all those emotions she was just, yeah. So,
That's
all right,
right.
we better go back to the room here.
All right. Thank
Wing
you.
it. Bye.
I'm doing a parent one. I could see Jackie doing an article about getting back to the new normal. There are so many articles out there, and running this with parents. The key is you get them to develop questions, it's easier.
So we're all back to normal.
We're all back to normal. Yes, we are. As normal as we're going to get. How about it?
Yeah, I just talked to Jennifer and I told her, and the other person that was in the room, I said, I teach second grade. My mind doesn't go this deep. I said, but I could ask them, like, what is the theme? Like, simpler questions is where I was going.
Well, and that's a great comment, because what I have then at the end of this are like starter questions for someone that really, like, I haven't done this at all. So what I asked you folks to do was I wanted you as teachers on the flip side to definitely understand the questions we ask are going to elicit either good or kind of like lackluster discussion. Like, I'll never forget the first parent-child book club that I did, and my school district is very traditional, very rural. And I didn't start that year with The Kite Runner by Carlo Dosini. That's a very controversial text. The first one I did was Tuesdays with Maury. And it's just a nice feel-good type book. And by Christmas time then, we met once a month. By Christmas time, I was able to take them into territory that was a lot of much more discussion worthy. So not to belabor, because I want to make sure that we get to the parent-child type capacity as well. But this piece of text I would use for high school or adults. I would not use this particular story. Quotes might be where you land or where you start with your younger ones, or a picture or a cartoon even. Or a Shel Silverstein, my favorite poem of his is Sick, you know, or even smaller than that, Snowball. He made himself a snowball, he took it to bed type thing, and then it turns out it wet the bed. You know, as it melted, it wet the bed. It doesn't have to be a lengthy piece of text. What did we come up with, folks, question-wise, because that's where I want to linger for about 3 minutes, and then we're going to move on.
I'll go. We thought of what would have happened in the past that would lead the protagonist to feel a sense of freedom from the death of her husband.
What an amazing question. And the men would definitely, by the way, respond differently to that type of question. I mean, a lot of people, when they read this the first go round, they're like, what? So she died of the joy that kills. And that's Chopin's being very kind of ironic and sarcastic there. That is a great question. How about another divergent question?
So my kids are really low readers, and I was like, oh good Lord, I would have to start small with this and be like, so what was this about? Like, what are we talking about?
Absolutely. And you know, this, I want to be very clear here. The piece of text, it's just in my nature. If I'm training adults, I use adult piece of text. But you're absolutely right. You could use, not this story, but you could use something that has more text with younger learners, but keep your questions scaffolded. Yeah, so what's going on? You can still go back to, what is the setting? You know, who are the main characters? Those are all great discussion starters to get the kids warmed up. This is when you want to dig to a deeper discussion, you definitely want to look at kind of like more in depth. How about one more in-depth question?
Diane, we talked about Josephine's mood towards her husband. What is her feeling towards her husband, and what evidence do you have to support that?
Excellent. And you know, that is a 30-minute discussion. So the types of questions that we generate, and I will be very honest with those of you with the younger ones, you probably are going to start by generating the questions. But our standard for a book talk, or like a book group, a book club, is more open-ended discussion, and that comes at the hands of the learners. So you start slowly, and I have here, these are some basics. Like, if you're going to start and you're going to pose questions to your kids or to adults that aren't accustomed to this, my first one is always on a scale of 1 to 10. How would you rate the read? Notice each one of these questions, what follows the question. Oh, I forgot one of them, but it's always why. So how would you rate this and why? Would you recommend this reading to a friend? If you could ask the author one question, what would it be and why? These are very kind of non-threatening opening segues. So a book group or the book talks are not intended necessarily to dig into like the questions that you have at the end of your chapter or at the end of a story. They are to generate discussion on the parts of the learners. And that's something a lot of us aren't familiar with. So I wanted to end today, and then I will show you, like, I have slide after slide of questions for different types of text for you as well. But the possible applications for this, and the one I'm thinking could really, really skyrocket. And we have Jackie in the group from Bellefonte, and she has done like the teacher-led community book clubs. But virtually, these are so much fun. And like I just picked Bald Eagle. So I thought of Jen, Bald Eagle. So one book, one Bald Eagle, where the teacher, of course, you can go ahead and lead this, but you select a piece of text. And as Jackie and they did at Bellefonte, they select a piece of text and everyone's reading it. But then with the online format, you definitely want to stick to the types of questions, throwing them out there. So the difference is the divergent questions for folks that aren't used to this will first come from you. Our goal with students then, folks, like the teacher-led book clubs for students, our goal is to start by throwing questions out to them to get them discussing, but our ultimate goal is to get them creating questions then. Like, I wonder why, and children are filled with curiosity. So the teacher-led book clubs for students is something that you could do once a week, or you might want to pick once a month. We know that there's going to be that gap, that slump in the summer. And I'm just so passionate about this. A lot of my coaches will say the same, that engaging them in conversations about stuff that's interesting to them, whether it be a book, whether it be an article, whether it be whatever the text is that you select, are significant. The parent-child book clubs are, when I ran that at my secondary level, they were reading the same book. And the parent and the children would come together and we would discuss. This online format would be awesome for that. Please don't worry if you have folks, if you try this and you have, say, half of the group is just, they're lurkers. Jackie, is that what you call it? I think that's what she calls it on Twitter. Or yeah, what kind of, they're just like in the background. That's absolutely fine. But when you're working with your kids to foster that collaboration, you'd want to use more of the pause, pounce, bounce, and those techniques. It can be a book club or article study for parents. And I would really, really highly recommend that. It doesn't have to be long. It could be 30 minutes. Teacher-led book clubs and the summer virtual literature circles, which I facilitated those every year. And the last year I was in my district, we had 420 out of 440 kids in the high school that were participating in that. It's all about, folks, the text. And it's about the questioning, not to feel threatening to them. So these are all applications for the use of what we've talked about this morning. So you know, and I'm scrolling, but I have developed, and these are some of the basics I used. Questions for fiction. Consideration of resources for the facilitation when you're doing this. What text will you use? Who's your audience? How much time do you have? So this is a perfect time if someone's brave and says, I want to try this. Our office hours virtually are 3 to 3:30, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and 9 to 9:30 in the morning. Feel free to hop on to that Zoom room. It's on the original page. And I would gladly, like Jen saying, where do you look for paintings? Where do you look for pictures? This is something that is just near and dear to me. So I can recommend pieces of text for any grade level, especially that will make you successful. But look at these questions. We have memoir, we have nonfiction, we have mystery and thriller. And those particular questions were generated or came from, I adapted them from, so I'm giving credit here to the best book club questions to spark discussion. Last but not least, and this is not something I'm having, but if someone says, I like more structure, Diane, and I want my kids writing questions, you might want to take a look at this article from ASCD Express because it talks about assignment of roles and making it more of a grade. This would definitely be for folks when you're back in the classroom and you want to give a grade. You could give a grade on the feedback surveys, but it's a very nice, albeit a very brief article. So what you folks did, believe it or not, in less than an hour, in 57 minutes was you created, we could take then the Kate Chopin story and we could throw those questions out there, but exactly what we did with the Salvador Dali painting, as well as that quotation, is exactly what the Kate Chopin piece would look like. So it's hard for some teachers because you want the students to be weighing in here. You want them to be doing the dialogue and discussion. But if Jen's teaching her younger ones, it's more like a volley where the teacher will throw out the question and then you let the kids go. When it seems like they've kind of exhausted that, then you ask them. Or if you're creating the questions, then you throw out a question. So questions or concerns, because I get the impression that for some of you, this was definitely new. The nice thing about this format is that eventually, in my classrooms, students led all discussion. And literally, I didn't have to tell them to write questions. As they would read, they'd come back with questions. Start small, don't begin with a book. But I would highly recommend this. You're talking about connections at home. I would highly recommend, and I have articles that I can suggest there as well for folks in the virtual office hours. If you want to try one with parents, I've been accumulating. This is a time where I think, oh, I wish I still had kids. Oh, I wish I still have my classroom, because there's some great materials and resources out there. Okay, questions, concerns? Let's see, thumbs up. How many of you think in your brave moment that you will or you would attempt this? You can do that, just the reaction and do the thumbs up, or you can do your physical thumbs up. And Kendra says yes. So I'm going to hold you guys to this. Nikki, not so much in your content area. Jackie and Stacy, have you already been doing this? Now's the time. I'm telling you, now's the time to work on it. It's a great opportunity to make connections with parents in kind of a non-threatening way. And if you get 4 or 5 people, that's absolutely okay. Before you know it, my parent-child book club, I'll never forget, my superintendent at the time said, you'll be lucky to get 7 people. And the first year I had 26. And by year 4, I had 78 folks, parents and children, that were participating. So it does snowball when they realize it's not a threatening type activity. So
I just put in the comments, Diane, that KSLA Central PA, so Stacy and Melissa and I just met virtually yesterday to talk about next steps with that, because we had an event planned for May that obviously isn't going to take place. And we threw around the idea of starting a parent-child book club and getting like some free books into the hands of people now, but we decided against that with all the schoolwork and all the transitions and all the flood of information that's currently happening. And by the time we get them the books and they read them, it'll be like the start of summer. So what we brainstormed, which we're going to flesh out the details with, is that, you know, a couple of years ago for Bellefonte Reads, one of our One Book, One Bellefonte titles was The One and Only Ivan. And that book, that movie from Disney is coming out this summer, and it's going to be very popular. So we were kind of talking about a resurgence of that, especially because there's the chapter book, and then there's also a picture book companion, also by Catherine Applegate. Plus, next week, The One and Only Bob is released, which is getting a lot of hype because it tells the story from the dog's perspective. So we don't have all the details worked out yet, but we brainstormed possibly having a either virtual or in-face meeting at like Barnes & Noble with parents and children, and then maybe scooting on over to the movie theater to watching the movie. So anything I think we can do to try to get the parents and kids interested is great, and make those connections.
That's spot on, Jackie, because the connections that we form, I've said it before, in our summer lit circle, in our program in my district of Bellwood-Antis, I had page to screen adaptations. So the kids came in 3 days in the summer. They had to blog, they go ahead and they were responding online as they were reading. So we had that virtual piece, but then they met in person, and I selected every book that had the movie adaptation. And I'm telling you, 99% of the kids said, oh, the book was so much better. So we offered 6 books like that. So that's a tremendous idea. You'll get takers. Yeah. And it's the community one is a little like, Jackie, you've done that. It's a little more daunting for folks, but just stick with knowing that you need something that's going to garner discussion, you know, whether it be virtual or face-to-face, but That's awesome, Stacy. Thank you for sharing the KSLA. And I would love, especially if it's the virtual, to be part of that. Okay, folks, if there are no other questions, if you need help with text, what you'd like to, I want to do this, Diane, but I'm not sure. Even my music person, I can tell you, log on to the virtual office hours and we'll help you out. Thank you very much, guys, and have a great day.